New Delhi, March the 12th, 1962. There is an air of expectancy at Palam Airport. Air India's Kanchenjunga brings from abroad a charming visitor, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, wife of the President of the United States of America. The first to receive her is Prime Minister Nehru. Among those present at the airport to receive Mrs. Kennedy and her sister, Princess Radziwill, are the United States Ambassador in India, Mr. Galbraith, and Mr. B.K. Nehru, India's Ambassador to the United States. Mrs. Kennedy is on a 9-day trip to India. She is cheered all along the drive to the city. After a brief halt at the U.S. Ambassador's guest house, Mrs. Kennedy makes an off-the-schedule dash to Vijay Chowk. She watches the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, drive back in state to Rashtrapati Bhavan, his official residence. He is returning after addressing a joint session of Parliament. Mrs. Kennedy begins her engagements in the capital with a courtesy call on the President. From Rashtrapati Bhavan to Rajghat to pay homage to the father of the nation at his Samadhi, the place where the mortal remains of Mahatma Gandhi were cremated. It is for her a moving experience. Then on to the U.S. Chancery. Designed by an American architect, it is a landmark of New Delhi's diplomatic enclave. Mrs. Kennedy meets American nationals in Delhi and the embassy staff. On the second day of her stay in Delhi, Mrs. Kennedy is the guest of honor at a luncheon given by the President. Later, she takes time off to visit the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. The institute is a center for postgraduate medical studies and research in the country. Herself a mother of 2 children, Mrs. Kennedy has no difficulty in making friends in the children's ward of the hospital attached to the institute. Mrs. Kennedy arrives at the Prime Minister's house to spend the next 2 days in Delhi. She is in India at the invitation of Mr. Nehru and his daughter. They were guests of the Kennedys in Washington last year. Prime Minister Nehru gives a formal dinner in honor of his house guests. After dinner, there is a program of Indian dances, folk and classical. The next day is a day of gifts. On the lawns of the Prime Minister's house, Mrs. Kennedy presents a children's carnival to Mrs. Indira Gandhi. It is a gift to India's children from the International Council of the Museum of Modern Art and Asia Society. The carnival is a play and art center for children between the ages of 4 and 12. There are some gifts for Mrs. Kennedy too, and her children, paintings and cute Indian dolls. The American visitor makes a new friend, Urvashi, the baby elephant brought specially for her from the Delhi Zoo. Visiting the Cottage Industries Emporium, Mrs. Kennedy is fascinated by the variety of Indian handicrafts. The handloom fabrics specially catch her feminine fancy. A leader in the world of fashion, Mrs. Kennedy takes a great interest in the fashion parade. Indian handloom fabrics are certainly versatile. And modern fashions aren't so modern after all. They bear a close affinity to traditional costumes. Mrs. Kennedy also watches craftsmen at work. These skills have been handed down from father to son for generations. Then follows a brief visit to an art gallery. Herself a devotee of the arts, Mrs. Kennedy sees the work of some leading contemporary Indian artists and sculptors. After 3 days' stay in Delhi, Mrs. Kennedy comes to Fatehpur Sikri. This is the legendary capital built during the 16th century by the Mughal Emperor Akbar to celebrate the birth of his son, Jahangir. But Akbar had to desert the city and go back to Agra because of the scarcity of water here. In the center of the huge courtyard is the marble mausoleum of Salim Chishti, the saint who had prophesied the birth of a son to Akbar. From the steps of the magnificent Buland Darwaza, or the high gateway, Mrs. Kennedy watches divers jump 80 feet into a deep well. Thrilled by the spectacle, she insists on complimenting them personally. From the deserted city to the world-famous Taj Mahal. Tribute to an immortal love, the marble mausoleum was built in the 17th century by Emperor Shah Jahan for his queen Mumtaz Mahal. Enchanted by its beauty, Mrs. Kennedy pays a second visit to see the romantic Taj by moonlight. A last-minute change in her schedule enables Mrs. Kennedy to visit the ancient city of Varanasi or Benares. Ignoring the midday sun, she takes a boat ride on the Ganga. Gliding along, Mrs. Kennedy gets a glimpse of this ageless city and its people. Her next halt is Udaipur, the city of lakes in Rajasthan. This 16th century city is known as the Venice of the East. Mrs. Kennedy visits one of the 2 island palaces on the Pichola Lake called Jag Mandir. A ride in a motor launch on the lake provides a relaxing interlude. Then on to Jaipur. At the palace of the Maharaja of Jaipur, Mrs. Kennedy receives a traditional Indian welcome. A drive to the nearby 17th century fort of Amber provides a peep into feudal India, now a thing of the past. This is the Taj Mahal, or the Hall of Mirrors. An elephant ride climaxes the visit to Amber. An excellent horseback rider, Mrs. Kennedy enjoys watching a game of polo in Jaipur. Polo has been played in India for some 800 years. Back in New Delhi, the U.S. Embassy goes Indian for Ambassador Galbraith's dinner in honor of Mrs. Kennedy. The guests at the farewell dinner include the Indian Vice President, Dr. Radhakrishnan, and Mr. Nehru. Among the many gifts Mrs. Kennedy and her sister receive are some works of Indian craftsmanship. March 21st. Just before leaving New Delhi, Mrs. Kennedy takes a few minutes off to play Holi with Mr. Nehru and his colleagues. Holi is a festival of color, an occasion when animosities are forgotten and friendships renewed. The 9-day visit ends on a note of friendly informality. Mrs. Kennedy's visit strengthens the friendly ties between India and the United States. For Mrs. Kennedy, it is difficult to say which day of her trip to India was the best. To her, they were all magic moments.